Hey guys, Frightener22 here, welcoming you back to another installment of Childhood Flix Picks. Tonight we're going to be taking a look at a wonderful film that blends the worlds of live action and animation together beautifully. So we're going to take a peek at 1994's The Pagemaster. Now this film I really fell in love with as a kid, and coincidentally I wasn't introduced to it during its original theatrical run. I actually discovered this film when it was actually debuted on VHS, and I still actually possess the VHS that I grew up watching. I used to watch this film all the time. There's just something so charming and wonderful and funny about the whole thing. I just love the blending of the live action and animation in this. The performances are great. Like I said, it's really funny and hysterical at times. And the biggest compliment that I really can pay to this film before I actually get into the meat of why I really like this film and what it's truly about is that, in my personal opinion, I think that Disney animation is the end-all be-all for the best animation, out there before, and today, of course. But, I just think that there's no one that compares to Disney. I think that they're the best at what they do. They make the best quality films, and just, really, everybody is just second best to them. But after watching The Pagemaster yet again, for the sake of this review, I was really surprised to notice just how much charm and just how much heart was put into this film that I couldn't help but compare it to so many other Disney animated classics that I grew up loving. So, I mean, to, bestow a compliment that The Pagemaster is as good or as fun as many Disney classics that I grew up with is a pretty big compliment, because, I mean, to be compared to any great Disney animated film has got to be, saying something about this 75-minute film. So, that said, let's go ahead and get into what this is all about. This film was actually co-directed by two directors, Joe Johnston, who directed the live-action segments, who, of course, directed so many great films, such as Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Jumanji, Jurassic Park 3, as well as his 2010 remake of The Wolfman, and currently he's filming the latest installment of the Marvel superhero films. He's taking over the directing duties of Captain America, which is due in theaters in 2011. And taking over for the animation directed sequences, it was actually Maurice Hunt, who he would actually go on to direct a segment in Fantasia 2000, and he actually did some uncredited directing duties on the Disney film Tarzan. So that's a pretty interesting thing to say, considering that I compare this film to being, just as good and as charming as many other classic Disney films. So it's interesting to see that the guy that directed the animation segments would go on to work with Disney in the long run. So this film actually stars, one of the greatest childhood actors of all time, Macaulay Culkin, and he's supported by an outstanding cast, which stars Christopher Lloyd, Mr. Doc Brown from Back to the Future himself, along with the voice talents of Whoopi Goldberg, Patrick Stewart, and Leonard Nimoy, believe it or not. Now, this film deals with Richard Tyler, who is played by Macaulay Culkin, and it's a pretty interesting thing that deals with him, is that he's, he's a kid that's really obsessed with statistics. He's really afraid of stuff. In the opening shot, there's a thunderstorm going on, and the camera takes place in his room, and you see he has, like, high-voltage signs next to outlets and no smoking signs. So he's a very cautious kid, and he's very afraid to take chances and, just do what kids do, run around, get dirty, climb up in tree houses and whatnot, but he's very terrified of the outside world. So that was just something cool to see, because I mean, we've seen plenty of films of, dealing with kids that are outsiders and just nervous and, about, being the unpopular kid, but this was like the first film, or at least, one of the few films that I can remember off the top of my head that really dealt with a kid being so, panicky and cautious about literally everything in the world. So it's a very cool, interesting twist, and it, really gives Macaulay Culkin's character as a child actor something different to work with, as opposed to just being, the typical, stereotypical, oddball out loser kid. So, the following morning, his dad is putting the finishing touches on his tree house, and he asks Richie to actually go and get some nails to finish off the job. So he goes, and on the way to getting the nails, there becomes a gigantic thunderstorm and, you know, downpours and whatnot. So instead of continuing the journey, Macaulay Culkin's character actually finds, you know, some cover in a really old historic library where he's greeted by a very eccentric librarian, Mr. Dewey, who is played by the great Christopher Lloyd. So after some conversation, Christopher Lloyd mistakes Macaulay Culkin's character for just a, you know, an average kid trying to find a book, and he's, you know, he claims that he has a wonderful talent for guessing what people need, so he thinks that he's interested in either fantasy or adventure or horror. So after all that's done, Macaulay Culkin finally gets his words out and tells him he just, you know, was, you know, finding a shelter from the storm and just needs a phone to simply call his parents to pick him up. So after Mr. Dewey sends him through the library where to find the phone, Macaulay Culkin's character looks up and he's, you know, sees this really, really amazing, like, Da Vinci-like painting on this epic ceiling in the library. And it just showcases all these, you know, wonderful images and illustrations from so many classic stories like Treasure Island, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Moby Dick, and then there's a picture of a wizard in the center of the painting. So Macaulay Culkin's character actually trips, and then when he wakes up, the painting above him is dripping of all the paint. So before you know it, the entire library is soaked in this paint, and it pretty much enraptures Macaulay Culkin's character. So before you know it, the film shifts from live action to full-on animation, and it looks really, really stunning. I mean, I have to give the animators a ton of credit in this because I really, really love the look of this film. So, he's greeted in his animated form by the wizard in the picture, and we learn that this wizard is actually the Pagemaster of the library. He is like the protector and the guy that pretty much runs the written words in the libraries, and he is actually voiced by Christopher Lloyd. So, in order for him to get back home safely, the Pagemaster tells him that he has to go through 3 tests: adventure, horror, and fantasy. So, over the course of the library, he comes across 3 books, literally books. And, of course, it's fantasy, who is voiced by Whoopi Goldberg, adventure, who's voiced by Patrick Stewart, and horror, who I believe is voiced by Ed Fegley Jr., but I could be wrong on that. But, yeah, everybody, you know, all the voice talents are actually really, really wonderful in this, and like I said before, the animation on them is excellent. So, as I was stating, Macaulay Culkin's character needs to go through these 3 rigorous tests and, you know, put him in all these dangerous and, you know, adventurous situations in order to get back to the exit of the library to finally go home. And, of course, you know, the first test that he goes through is horror, so of course that's my favorite sequence throughout the whole film. And the best thing about this film is that it showcases and puts the characters in all these iconic parts of all these, you know, really, really beloved books. So, you know, in the horror section, it's basically set up like a graveyard with books, and they encounter Dr. Jekyll / Mr. Hyde, and, you know, a big, dark sequence goes on when meeting him. So I love that sequence. I think it's awesome. I think it's incredibly well animated, very dark and spooky and eerie. You have ghosts and stuff. And then after that, they switch shifts. They get through the house of Dr. Jekyll, and then they end up on a beach setting, and they come across, of course, you know, the Moby Dick scene where the whale pretty much attacks them, and then they come across Long John Silver and his group of pirates. So they're basically a part of Treasure Island at that point, and they have to fight off the pirates, and then the book Horror actually gets captured by a little mini soldier, so it's basically a nod to Gulliver's Travels. So there's really these awesome little situations that are just taken straight out of all these classic historic books. So it's cool to see these, you know, these really fun animated characters placed in all these iconic, you know, images that many, many children have grown up reading and loving for many years. So it's really cool. So, you know, the big finale of the film takes place, you know, Macaulay Culkin's final test is, of course, in fantasy, so it's basically a big duel, with a dragon, and, Macaulay Culkin has to take over the reins of a knight with a sword and, a shield, so he becomes like the knight in shining armor of the finale of the film, and it's really, really wonderful. So once he goes through his all of his tests, he's finally taken back to the library, and he made a promise to the 3 books that once they get through it, that he would take them all back home with him, which he, of course, does, and he leaves the library being, a little bit more wiser and ready to become a kid and not rely so much on statistics. All that said, that certainly was a mouthful, but I really, really love this film. I mean, I think it's a wonderful blend of live action and animation. I think the voice talent of this is really, really great. It's such an underrated gem, especially when people talk about Macaulay Culkin in general and stuff like that. I think, of course, people love the Home Alone films, they love Richie Rich, but The Pagemaster is just one of those films that I never feel like it's brought up, enough, because it really is a wonderfully well-made animated film. I mean, it's funny, it's charming, and there's just so much heart in this movie. That's why I can't really, stress enough that Disney comment that I made before, is that this film is just reeks of Disney. I don't know what it is about it, but there's just so much about it that, the animation and just, the kind of time and effort that was put into it, at a time where I guess, there wasn't too many, amazing things going on in animation. Of course, Disney was just kind of getting, their jump start back into, the business. I mean, of course, they were, hot off the success of The Little Mermaid and the Beauty and the Beast, and of course The Lion King, so they were just, starting to get their shit back together. But The Pagemaster is certainly an underrated gem that really needs to be discovered by today's audiences, because it's really that great. And it's interesting to note, because, as I say, this did come out in 1994, the same year that Macaulay Culkin came out with Richie Rich, and in this year, this would be the last 2 films that he did before he went on his 10-year hiatus, before coming back in 2003 to star in the film Pagemaster. But this film, along with Richie Rich, are, great, wonderful films to end, his childhood acting career, but The Pagemaster is a splendid, absolutely splendid live-action film. So if you guys have never seen this or never heard about it, I don't blame you, because it certainly is underrated, but this is all the more reason to check this out. It's fun, it's adventurous, and the animation just looks tight. It's excellent, really, really awesome. I found my copy of the DVD in the $5 Walmart bin, so I can't imagine that any other place could possibly be charging any more than that for it. But it really, really is a a great film to be discovered. So I hope after you guys check out this review that many more of you guys will be interested to check this film out. As always, guys, thanks again for tuning in to Frightener 22's Childhood Flix Picks, and I'll see you next time. This is Frightener 22.